Hi everyone, this is Tom Salemi of Device Talks. I'm thrilled to be back here at the glorious 160 studios, all decked out with our Device Talks West colors. And super happy to be joined by Joe Mullings, of the Mullings Group. Joe, how are you? Thanks for having me down here again.
I am well. I'm just saying beforehand, it's so fun to have a peer in the industry who really knows how to do this, loves this medium.
Oh yes.
And it's a treat that you're down here again. I take it as a compliment back to Dragonfly, 160, and TMG. So thanks for the opportunity.
I slacked a colleague yesterday and said, I'm going to Florida tomorrow. I'm going to my Disney World tomorrow. I'm going to Joe Mullings Studio. So this is where I want to be. So you make dreams come true, Joe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's talk about Device Talks West. Thrilled to have the Mullings Group as part of Device Talks West. It's going to be a great 2 days, October 18th and 19th at the Santa Clara Convention Center. We're leading off day 2 with an interview with Dave Rosa, who's the president of Intuitive Surgical. And I know we've talked about Intuitive in the past. I want to talk about the company in a moment, but let's talk about Dave Rosa and his elevation to the president's role earlier this year. You're obviously tracking this industry pretty closely. Did you read anything into that title? Is it just merely I guess a clarifying of roles? Is there a succession plan in place? What were your thoughts when you heard the news, either through the release, or I'm guessing you probably knew it was coming before the rest of us did?
Yeah. First of all, I think Dave is a super pick for that.
Yeah.
First and foremost. So if you ever had a chance to interact with Dave is, I think he's been one of the key ambassadors for the large format surgical robotic world in the industry. Probably knows the industry and the customer base better than anybody. Not surprised to have Gary sort of move slightly away. You know, this is an interesting year. You know, you got. I think Gary will always be strategically involved in where's the industry going, certainly. And he's done a great job over the years of battling through, you know, people say Intuitive's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and they certainly are, but it hasn't been an easy journey. And so Rose has been there the whole time, right? Gary's certainly the architect of that. And I think they've got that large format robot as it sits today, not bedside. They've got that locked up. And so I think Dave Rose is a great guy to continue pushing that playbook. Now, whether or not Dave will be involved in the next iteration of where things are going, that's a whole nother, you know, question. But from running Intuitive and having Gary there, this year retiring was Mike Salem out of Edwards, and certainly Mike Minogue out of Abiomed. And then I put Gary as one of those iconic med device CEOs that have sort of stepped away a little bit from the sort of day-to-day operation. Now, whether Salem or Minogue stay engaged with Medtech, we'll see. I think Gary will. I think it's in his DNA. You know, when you're a surgical robotic guy who created an entire category, you know, Fred Moll, right?
Yep.
Still deep in everything, his hands in robotics. So we'll see what happens with that. But I love Dave Rose as a selection there.
Interesting that you bring up Mike Musalem and Mike Minogue. With Intuitive Surgical, I mean, they are a robotics company, I think, first and foremost, but they want to be, and they see themselves as a medical device company as well that does robotics. What is the ideal, or who is the ideal leader for an organization like that? Is it someone who's coming from the robotics perspective, or someone coming from the medical device perspective? Because we talked about this before. It's really a unique sort of juxtaposition of two industries and requires a very special skill set.
It's interesting because you've seen two of the other large strategics, J&J, Medtronic, select people in the recent past who are robotics experts and don't necessarily have a medtech background. And that's an interesting selection because I don't think the robot is the challenge, or the technology of the robot is the challenge in medtech and large format. Certainly large format robotics is by far probably one of the most complex out of all robotics, soft tissue especially. Let's just stay on soft tissue here. So bringing in somebody who's a roboticist, I don't know if the problems to be solved in the large strategic is at the robotic level. I think it's at a number of other levels, such as workflow, first and foremost. What does that clinical workflow look like? And how do I stay engaged in that clinical workflow without ever getting in the way and being there transparently? And that's why you have to handle it to Intuitive, because they created the category. And it's interesting, you know, Mullings created the category. Minogue created the category.
Interesting.
And
How about that?
going back to your question is, I'm not sure appointing somebody who's a roboticist is going to solve the problem when culturally those organizations are not digital natives.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not robotic natives, but what they are native is what's happening in the OR or the ASC. And the technical issues tend to be the smallest issue, but the go-to-market, the commercial strategy, the workflow, the interaction with the KOLs, tier 1, tier 2 hospitals, changing centers of care, solving those problems seem to be more difficult than the robotic problem bedside.
The risk of going too far off topic, as I always do when I'm talking to you, because as you speak, I think of more. I mean, you talked about CMR and their CEO, Per, and I'm forgetting his last name.
Per, yep.
Yep. He was a robotics guy, and I thought like, oh, this is great. You've got a robotics person coming in. They're going to bring sort of that industrial knowledge, that discipline, that understanding of how to bring a robotic system into an industry, and that obviously didn't work out as planned.
Well, yes, and so what happens with Per, great leader,
Sure.
industrial robotics, you pointed it out. How you scale an industrial robot is different than how you scale a surgical robot.
Yeah.
That's one. Two is the decisions that you make, and CMR, you know, I'm not sure Per was the causation of their pause into the US market or their readjustment in certain markets, but it certainly is an enormous liability as you make scalability decisions, they have to match your go-to-market, your clinical and your regulatory decisions. And Per got himself into a situation, or that role got themselves in a situation at an apex of a point in CMR's existence of the issue was more of clinical regulatory pathways, not manufacturing scalability. And so if you can't solve the clinical regulatory go-to-market pathways, and you're the CEO, you get to make the final decision. And not having that domain knowledge or that deep understanding of the wins, W-I-N-D-S, wins, that people might be telling you in your ear or straight to your face in a meeting, you don't know how to put weight upon that. And so when you start to compound those decision points across the continuum, your board is going to look at you in a certain way, the market's going to look at you in a certain way, your lieutenants are going to look at you in a certain way, and I think it's going to introduce a level of doubt that a CEO that is going to battle in the most vicious market there is in med device, it's going to be a problem.
Interesting. Focusing again on Intuitive in Dave's elevation to presidency. I mean, what I find fascinating about the company is the stability within. I mean, a lot of the people I've interviewed there, they've been there almost from the start or early on, and very often it's their first job in medical devices. They're coming from another industry, and they stay there. They're not moving around. What is it about the Intuitive culture that keeps people there? Is it the fact that it's the clear leader in the space, and you never get tired of winning, and and you want to be part of that story for as long as you can? Is there something deeper than that? What have you seen from folks you've interacted there?
It's really, you know, knowing we were going to get together today, you know, I often look at the obvious and try and go back systemically and look at the roots of things. And the strength of any corporation is also its weakness. And so when you look at Intuitive, you're exactly right. The people have been there a really long time. And look, that's a culture, that's a tribe. It's not a cult, it's a tribe. And when you're working on one of the most complex platforms ever to come into the medical device industry, and you win, right? Depending on your definition of win, it's hard to leave there. And so where do you go after that? You know, where do you go? And I always joke about that when people are in search and they come to TMG. I'm like, where are you going to go after you go to TMG? And I don't mean that in an egotistical way, but you're surrounded by pushing the edge of your industry every single day. And so maybe as other large format or mid format surgical robotics companies come into play, you might see an exodus of sorts. But you're cashing options checks. You're in a tribe that's nothing but winning. But you can have an ossification of an entrenched mindset take place. And you look at the directors and VPs at a company that's been there a long time or same group think, you do run the risk of thinking in a very specific way that got you there but might not take you there as markets shift. And look, I think it's one of the liabilities and that is taking place in some of the large strategics today, is the leadership's been there a really long time. And they'll bring in an outsider and plug them in, and that outsider will be brought in from the outside because they're going to lead the change, but change means all these other people may be replaced. And so career defense comes up. And then consciously or unconsciously, that outsider who was brought in is a threat to the current status quo, which is Mercedes-Benz payments, private schools, mortgage payments. And so, you know, that is the quandary that you run across here in those situations. So, you know, I think that Intuitive will always own that large format robot category, but it's become, it used to be the only pie, but the format of surgical robotics is changing on soft tissue, and that is going to be the biggest threat to Intuitive, is the changing set of care, and the redefinition of what a robot is in that category is the biggest threat to Intuitive.
Well, let's talk about Intuitive's place in the market. I brought up the winning. They've, as you said, Gary Guthart and Intuitive helped create this market. They're still the clear leader in soft tissue. There's other companies making runs for them. Is it too late? Does Intuitive have an unbeatable head start? Of course, it's tough to say that for certainty, but let's just for the point of discussion, how should competitors view Intuitive? Because from my point of view, they seem to be pretty unbeatable right now.
For the position they're in and the solution they're bringing, the form factor of the solution they're bringing, there's no sense in picking a fight with them. The question is the changing centers of care are rapidly evolving. And will their format, or the current formats they have between Da Vinci, SP, right? The current formats they have, do those address the changing centers of care? So picking a fight with them on the battleground of, in a hospital, a robot in a large room with the systems that they've built, picking a fight there is insanity. Because there might be somebody out there that can beat them, but along the way, the number of dead bodies that we've already seen accumulating on the side of the road, is that worth it? So perhaps we should be looking at, if I wanted to compete with them, I want to compete with them on the future place that soft tissue surgery is going to be occurring. That's the fight to pick. On where is that, going to Gretzky, where's the changing center of care and soft tissue surgery going to occur 3 years from now? Who's going to be doing it? Where's it going to be done? And what is going to be the go-to-market or pricing? And we have, the next 5 years are going to be introducing a change in all of those categories that we've never seen before in the healthcare industry. So I pick a fight in an area of where healthcare is going to be, not where it is today.
It's a great point. You mentioned the evolving setting for surgical robotics, and we'll be talking about that at Device Talks West. We'll have a panel with a lot of those companies that are in the robotic surgical space, but coming at it from a decidedly different direction. For example, we'll have Moon Surgical there, and as well will be on the panel. We'll have Quantum Surgical there. We'll have Burton Nahum be there as well. And to your point, they're all coming at surgical robotics from a different direction than Intuitive, and we'll be hearing from the providers as well, who are the ones who are going to be ultimately paying for this technology. So let's follow that point a bit. I think that's going to be a great panel. But where is surgical robotics going? How is that going to change in the next 5 years? Are we simply talking about ASCs? Are we just talking about the ability to service hospitals that are perhaps away from metro centers and in more rural settings? What is going to develop over the next 5 years from your perspective?
So those are great examples, and the third one I tossed in there beside quantum and Moon is distal motion.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those are an interesting format, and here's why, Tom, is they all have a proposition that are saying, let's use what's already resident in the OR today. So the visualization system, the end effectors, the stack on the imaging in the room, quantum, distal, and Moon are all saying, I can't possibly invest in best in class in all those. And there's an argument to be said is Intuitive is best in class as an aggregator of their technology of soft tissue robotics in an OR in a hospital. But 50% of the hospitals right now are operating a deficit. Trying to get a CapEx in there is difficult. But they still have end effectors that have been in inventory for 5, 10, 15 years. Not the literal devices, but the technology hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
The scope systems, right? Visualization systems, right? People want an Olympus, a Fuji, a Storz, a Stryker. Why am I going to try and beat those where they're best in class? Keep using those. You don't have to reinvest in everything. You don't have to put those out in the hallway. But I'm going to give you a soft tissue robot that is going to accommodate what you already have in your center of care, in your OR. So I think that's where the next level of surgical robotics is going, and it's going to keep the doc bedside. The doc likes to be bedside.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remove a couple teleoperative features on my robot in order to get bedside, and I still have best-in-class visualization, I'm going to go there. Here's another unlock in each of those. I think you're going to see a fantastic cause and effect by a system like Moon and even quantum. What do I mean by that? Once you see what the Moon system looks like, it is going to be an unlock for the scope manufacturers. Because historically, if you've watched what's happened in the development of single-use scopes, or companies like Active Surgical that have a really good sort of tissue characterization, multispectral technology that sort of plugs into the system. That person who's got to hold the scope for 2 hours, 3 hours in a procedure, that assist, right? Changing the form factor or the weight on that while they're holding that in a soft tissue thoracic surgery, you don't want to change any of that. This comes back to change of workflow.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take a system like Moon, and now that is an automated scope holder, I can change the weight, the balance, the size, the features. I can enhance a number of things because it's no longer a human hand holding it. So I think you're going to have and I wrote an article in 2018 about this, a here, hold this robotic platform. You're going to start to see an acceleration in product evolution in scopes, end effectors, and other devices that typically have gone down a channel that have been limited by the current robotic systems that then had to make their own end effectors,
Right.
had to make their own video systems. I think you're going to start to see an entire subset start to come out there.
So that's a significantly different business model for those robotics companies if they're not developing the devices that'll be used with the system, if they're going to be more agnostic to other systems out there. that opens up the field, I would think, for a lot of different players to come in and just, you're right, find those single problems that need to be solved and need to help the surgeon right there next to the patient. So are we on the cusp of more quantums and more moons being developed?
100%.
Yeah.
Why? Because you can make a less expensive system. You can make a system that, what's the intention there? The intention there is to reduce the cognitive load on the surgeon and the work team in the OR, increase precision, capture data, actionable data, and enhance the movement of the person doing the surgery and/or the team involved. All that can be done with a lower cost robot that is smaller on a footprint, can fit into the emerging centers of care, which is the ASC world, and is going to address the price point and the financial load that's occurring right now in hospitals, let alone fit into the PE world of ASCs, where you're going to get a SaaS model. You're going to get a per-click go-to-market on these now. So you don't have to drop $1.5 million, $2 million in a large format robot, let alone have it fit in a room. And if you've gone into some of these sort of lap surgical rooms, these are very small compared to a big OR. So I think you're going to have an intuitive machine sitting in one room, and then you're going to have sort of these moon or quantum machines sitting in a room right next door. Turn times are quicker, and you're going to be able to add intelligence. The problem that the big strategics had, in particular J&J and Medtronic, they had the money, they had the distribution network, but they locked and loaded on a large format robot, fighting against the owner of that, like real owner of that, and the market has shifted. So I would not be surprised to see a J&J especially start to come out and pick up a series of these moons, quantums, and become a robotic aggregator rather than trying to make it robot themselves. The same way they've done it in their cardiovascular portfolios, in their orthopedic portfolios. They've bought best-in-class products and and they did it with Abiomed. So they're gonna buy into a category and start to buy the Impellas of the robotic world.
Interesting.
And then start to aggregate those, and then leave those roboticists alone to continue to develop the next generation and the next generation, rather than buy the robot, put it into play. And I've said it before with you, the real R&D starts after the robot gets out into market commercially, not all of the lift in order to bring it to market. So I think we're going to see an amazing time over the next 5 years because of the changing centers of care, because the lower cost to enter the market, and because now we're going to empower what's already in the OR, and those hospitals and/or ASCs aren't going to have to put out a piece of CapEx to pasture that they just bought 3 years ago.
Exciting times. You anticipated my questions about how the larger OEMs might respond. So do you see those internal surgical robotics programs at the companies you mentioned? Do you see them changing at this point, or you just anticipate that that's something that's going to come?
Well, I think you're talking about the large strategics?
Yeah,
like
Johnson,
Medtronic
Johnson,
and J&J as an example. Yeah, so let's talk about that. They already made their decision on some of the things they've done over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Right? They've put those programs on ice. And they've lost some great engineers along the way. And the cost to develop the robot is, I think, a smaller majority of bringing the robot to market. And then the lift required and the domain knowledge and the digital native mindset in the company doesn't reside there. And I think they finally came to that conclusion. And if they haven't, I hope they're watching this. Because you have to bring that core competency in-house and covet it, take care of it, feed it, and give those engineers and clinical people and manufacturing people a reason to stay. And so you talked earlier, people don't leave Intuitive. We talked about this earlier. Why don't they leave Intuitive? Because Gary has given them a playground to continue to push their love. People get into robotics because it's a passion and a love. So if you create a playground in Medtronic, in J&J, outside of the hallowed walls of the mothership, and say, just go do it, leave it alone, and go play. Globus did that. Globus created their robotic platform in Methuen, Massachusetts, with Norbert Johnson, away from the Philly facility where they made implants, because the mindsets are different. So I think you're going to have the large strategics finally say, let's make the acquisition, let's create a robotic playground, let's take a quantum and a moon and a distal and take best practices. So we're going to buy a robot platform in each category. And now let's get the mind share and let's get the digital booty and take all that digital, aggregate it and learn from that. That's where the large strategic should be going. And there's been never better buying time than right now.
Excellent. Well, these are exciting times for surgical robotics. We're going to be exploring it at Device Talks West, both in our conversation with Dave Rose and Intuitive, but also talking to the newer players from Quantum and Moon Surgical and others. So, Joe Mullings, thanks for the time today, and thanks, of course, for being part of Device Talks West.
Always. Thanks for the opportunity.